The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as James pressed his back against the cold break room wall, heart hammering in his chest. His manager, Diane, stood with her finger pressed to her lips, eyes wide with urgency. "Don't make a sound," she whispered, "no one can know." In that moment, everything James had worked for hung in the balance, his job, his dignity, and most importantly, the future he was desperately trying to build for his daughter. Hey everyone! Before we dive deeper into James's story, if you're enjoying this emotional journey already, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories that remind us of the extraordinary courage in ordinary lives. Your support means everything, and trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. James Parker never expected to be raising 8-year-old Sophie alone. 3 years ago, his wife Vanessa had kissed them goodbye one rainy morning, headed to work, and never came home. A truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. The grief had nearly destroyed him, but Sophie needed him, so he learned to function through the pain, taking a job at Meridian Office Supplies to keep a roof over their heads. It wasn't glamorous work, but the steady paycheck meant Sophie could stay in the same school with her friends, one less disruption in her already fractured world. James worked the warehouse, packing orders and occasionally helping customers when the floor was short-staffed. He kept to himself, arriving early and leaving precisely at 5 to pick up Sophie from after-school care. His co-workers knew him as quiet, efficient, and private. Few knew he was raising a child alone, fewer still understood the daily tightrope he walked. The morning routine of braiding Sophie's hair while burning toast. The nights spent helping with homework when his own eyes could barely stay open. The constant fear that one missed day of work, one emergency, one mistake could bring their precarious stability crashing down. Diane Matthews had been the warehouse manager for 15 years. A no-nonsense woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair always pulled into a practical bun, she ran a tight ship. Employees respected her fairness but feared her clipboard and piercing gaze that seemed to catalog every misplaced item, every minute of tardiness. James had always been careful to stay on Diane's good side, arriving 10 minutes early each day, taking the shortest possible lunch breaks, volunteering for inventory weekends. He couldn't afford to lose this job. Single parenthood had taught him that security was an illusion that required constant maintenance. The trouble began on a Tuesday in October. Sophie had woken with a fever, her small body radiating heat as she coughed into her unicorn pajama sleeve. "I'm fine, Daddy," she'd insisted, her voice raspy. "I can go to school." James had pressed his lips to her forehead, feeling the burn against his skin. "Not today, kiddo. You're staying home." Panic rose in his throat as he called his usual backup, his elderly neighbor Mrs. Hernandez, only to learn she was visiting her sister in Florida. His brother lived 2 states away. Sophie's best friend's mom worked full-time. The after-school program wouldn't take sick children. With trembling fingers, he'd called work, explaining the situation to Diane. "Parker," she'd said, her voice clipped. "We're receiving the holiday inventory today. Everyone needs to be here." "I understand, but my daughter. Find someone to watch her. We need you at 8 sharp." The line went dead before he could respond. James had sat on the edge of Sophie's bed, watching her fitful sleep, feeling the walls closing in. He couldn't lose this job. The medical bills from Vanessa's brief hospital stay before she passed were still hanging over him. The rent had increased twice. Sophie needed new winter boots. In desperation, he'd made a decision that would change everything. At 7:45 a.m., James had walked through the employee entrance of Meridian Office Supplies, Sophie trailing behind him like a shadow, bundled in her coat with a backpack containing coloring books, her favorite stuffed rabbit, and enough cold medicine to get her through the day. "Remember what we talked about," he whispered, kneeling to her level in the empty hallway. "You stay in the break room. Don't make any noise. If anyone comes in, hide in the supply closet. I'll check on you whenever I can." Sophie had nodded solemnly, her eyes glassy with fever but understanding the gravity of the situation. At 8 years old, she'd already learned that sometimes rules had to bend so lives wouldn't break. For 3 hours, the plan worked. James snuck away twice to check on Sophie, finding her quietly coloring or napping on the break room couch. The warehouse was busy enough with the inventory delivery that his brief absences went unnoticed. Until 11:30 a.m., when disaster struck. James had been helping unload a particularly large shipment when he heard it, a crash from the break room, followed by a fit of coughing. His blood ran cold as he saw Diane's head snap up, her eyes narrowing as she looked toward the sound. "What was that?" she asked, already moving toward the break room. James abandoned the box he was unpacking and raced after her, mind spinning with excuses, apologies, pleas to not fire him on the spot. He caught up just as Diane pushed open the break room door. Sophie stood frozen beside an overturned chair, her face flushed with fever, a spilled juice box forming a purple puddle at her feet. Her eyes widened in terror when she saw Diane. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. "I got dizzy." Diane turned to James, her expression unreadable. "Parker. Explain. Now." The words tumbled out of him, Sophie's fever, the lack of childcare, his desperation to keep his job, the impossibility of his situation. He finished with a resigned, "I understand if you need to let me go. I just ask for 2 weeks to find something else." To his shock, Diane had stepped fully into the break room and carefully closed the door behind them. That's when she'd uttered those words that had stopped his heart, "Don't make a sound. No one can know." For a moment, James thought he was being fired in private, a small mercy to spare his dignity. Instead, Diane knelt beside Sophie, placing a hand on her forehead. "You're burning up, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentler than James had ever heard it. She looked up at him. "My office has a cot for when I work late. She can rest there where it's quiet. I'll tell everyone you're doing special inventory in the back storage." James stared at her, uncomprehending. "You're not firing me?" Diane stood, straightening her blazer. 25 years ago, I was you. Single mom, sick kid, no options. My manager then showed me kindness I didn't deserve but desperately needed." She checked her watch. "We have 3 minutes to get her to my office without being seen. The regional director is visiting today. If anyone finds out about this, we'll both lose our jobs." That afternoon became a carefully choreographed dance. Diane created tasks that kept James near her office, allowing him to check on Sophie regularly. She shared her lunch with the girl and even produced a thermometer and children's Tylenol from her purse. "Old habits," she explained when James raised an eyebrow. "My son's 30 now, but I never stopped carrying the essentials." By closing time, Sophie's fever had broken. As they prepared to leave, Diane handed James a business card. "My daughter-in-law runs a home daycare 10 minutes from here. She keeps spots open for emergencies. Call her next time." She paused. "And Parker? This stays between us." James nodded, throat tight with gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how to." "Don't thank me," Diane cut him off. "Just pay it forward someday." That night, as James tucked Sophie into bed, she asked, "Is Miss Diane an angel, Daddy?" James smiled, smoothing her hair. "No, kiddo. Just someone who remembers what it's like to struggle." In the months that followed, things changed subtly at Meridian. Diane implemented a new emergency childcare policy for employees. The break room was stocked with children's books and quiet toys. A small cot appeared in the storage closet, officially for employee rest during overtime shifts. James found himself invited to staff gatherings he'd previously avoided, gradually sharing more of his story with coworkers who, it turned out, had their own struggles, aging parents, special needs children, second jobs. The warehouse team began covering for each other during family emergencies, no questions asked. 2 years later, when Diane announced her retirement, she recommended James as her replacement. "You understand that people are more than their productivity," she told him. "That's what this place needs." On her last day, as the staff gathered for cake in the break room, the same room where everything had changed, Diane pulled James aside. "Remember that day?" she asked. James nodded. "Every time I close this door. I was terrified," she admitted. "Breaking company policy, risking my job. But some rules exist because no one has been brave enough to challenge them." She squeezed his arm. "Sometimes the most important leadership happens behind closed doors, in moments no one else sees." As the new warehouse manager, James's first official act was to convert the rarely used conference room into an emergency childcare space. When the regional director questioned the expense, James simply said, "It's not a cost. It's an investment in our people." The policy spread to other branches, eventually becoming part of the company's benefits package, all because one manager had closed a break room door and whispered, "Don't make a sound. No one can know." 5 years after that fateful day, James stood in the break room, now decorated with photos of employees' families. Sophie, now a teenager, occasionally stopped by after school to do homework in the quiet room her father had once hidden her in. The door opened, and a young man entered, his expression harried and anxious, the same look James had worn years before. "Mr. Parker," he said, "I'm sorry to ask, but my son's school just called. He's sick, and my wife's out of town. I know the big shipment is coming, but—" James raised a hand, stopping him. "Go get your son, Ryan. Family comes first. But the inventory. We'll be here tomorrow." James smiled. "Some things can't wait." As Ryan left, relief washing over his face, James thought about how a single act of compassion had rippled outward, changing not just his life but an entire company culture. Sometimes the most profound changes begin in the smallest spaces, behind closed doors, in whispered conversations, in moments of human connection that no employee handbook could ever capture. That's the thing about kindness. It doesn't need an audience to matter. Sometimes, the most meaningful acts of grace are the ones no one else ever sees. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that celebrates the quiet heroes among us. Remember, we're all fighting battles others know nothing about. A little compassion can change someone.